In section 4.7, we're going to learn how to use the quadratic formula to solve a quadratic equation. To solve a quadratic equation, ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0, we can use the quadratic formula. And that formula is negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. Now, while this equation looks kind of ugly and hard to work with, the quadratic formula can be easy in the sense that you don't really have to think about it too much. As long as you know what this formula is, you can kind of mindlessly plug in your a, b, and c value and it'll spit out an answer. So it's kind of unlike the completing the square method where you kind of have to have a game plan and think of all these different steps to use, which is how the quadratic formula can be kind of helpful. And ultimately, so we're setting the equation equal to 0 and it'll help us find zeros on a graph. So if we wanted to double check by seeing this visually or graphing an equation, that's also kind of what I'm finding. I'm just doing this algebraically using the formula. So let's look at an example. I want to use the quadratic formula to solve for x. I have the equation 2x squared minus x equals 4. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to move everything to one side to get this in standard form. I have 2x squared minus x minus 4 equals 0. So from here, I always like to just write out a list of my a, b, and c values. My a value is 2, b value is negative 1, and my c value is negative 4. So when I plug this into the quadratic formula, I should get something that looks like this. Now keep in mind here, including negatives in the right spot is going to be really important to focus on when doing the quadratic formula. So in the very beginning when you're doing negative b, notice how I have negative of, in parentheses, negative 1. The easiest thing to screw up in the quadratic formula is misplacing a negative somewhere or forgetting to put in a negative. So just be mindful of that when you're doing these kinds of problems. When I plug everything in, now I'm going to kind of go through and start to simplify things. So negative of negative 1 would turn into positive 1. I calculate everything under the square root by I would type in negative 1 squared minus 4 times 2 times negative 4 in my calculator. I get 33. And then 2 times 2 would give me 4. Now everything's simplified down as much as I can have it. So I'm going to split this up. And my two solutions here is 1 plus the square root of 33 over 4 and 1 minus the square root of 33 over 4. And I'm done. Also, the quadratic formula can be helpful here. So for example, these two equations are, if I put these in my calculator or looked at this on the graph, would be a big, long, ugly decimal. So something like on the ACT or SAT, if you want an exact solution, this would be that exact solution. So this answer would be some irrational decimal that I would have to round otherwise. So the quadratic formula helps us find exact solutions. So let's look at one more example. Here I have an equation x squared plus 6x plus 9 equals 0. Now you might be noticing there, hey, this is a perfect square trinomial. I could just factor this, which you absolutely could. But let's just see how I could also solve this using the quadratic formula and just kind of compare what we get. So again, I'm going to write out my a, b, and c values. A equals 1, b equals 6, and c equals 9. And I'm going to plug it into my formula like so. I get negative 6 plus or minus 6 squared minus 4 times 1 times 9 all over 2 times 1. And from here, I'm going to just start to simplify everything under the square root. And what I see here is I'm going to get 36 minus 36, which leaves me with the square root of 0, which is just 0. So negative 6 plus 0, negative 6 minus 0 is the same thing. So I'm just going to rewrite this as negative 6 over 2, which leaves me with x equals negative 3. Notice if you factor this, you would get x plus 3 squared. So you would get the same solution here. Also notice how I only got one solution or one x value here. So this kind of problem would be a graph that only touches the x-axis one time. And there's a specific way that I can know how many solutions I'm going to have, and that's the last thing that we're going to cover in this video. Everything under that square root we can call the discriminant, which again specifically is b squared minus 4ac. So again, everything under that square root. And by what kind of value that discriminant is will tell us how many solutions we have on our graph. So if the discriminant value is positive, like that first example that we had, your graph would have two solutions, or would cross the x-axis twice. If your discriminant is equal to 0, like that problem that we just did, your graph would only have one solution, or it only touches the x-axis once. Finally, if your discriminant is negative, you would have no real solutions on your graph. So I would never cross that x-axis. I could have imaginary solutions, which is going to be the last thing that we cover in this unit.